Hello, AP Biology students. We're going to go over the 7th section in Unit 4. And in this section, we're going to talk about something called checkpoints. I like to relate this section to the checkpoints you might see on the road. Sometimes, especially at night, the cops will set up a checkpoint and check vehicles to make sure the person that is driving is sober. This is in order to make sure the roads are safe and to stop anyone that might be drunk driving. These checkpoints that we have set up to ensure safety on our roads are very similar to the checkpoints that cells use to stop cells from becoming cancerous. There are three main checkpoints within the cell cycle where the cell has to check on internal conditions and kind of decide whether or not to move forward. If the cell does encounter a problem, let's say with its genetic code or something being produced, it can try to fix those problems before going further. But sometimes the cell can't fix these problems and it will stop the cell from going further into the cell cycle. Now, our first main checkpoint is going to be the G1 checkpoint. And the cell is going to use proteins to check to make sure there's just enough room within the cell and enough organelles to replicate. Again, if these conditions aren't met, it's going to try to fix them before moving on. I found this comic and I thought this does a great job of showing what actually happens here at that checkpoint. After the cell checks and makes sure that everything internally is okay, it will allow the cell to move on to S phase. During the G2 checkpoint, the cell is going to check to make sure that DNA replication has finished, and it's also going to check for DNA damage. If there's DNA damage, that could cause the cell to become cancerous, and the cell doesn't want that to happen. Our last checkpoint is going to be the mitotic checkpoint. This is the only checkpoint that occurs during the M phase. This is where the cell is going to check to make sure that the chromosomes have attached correctly to the mitotic spindle or the spindle fibers. Remember, we want to have the correct number of chromosomes in each cell at the end of mitosis. If a cell doesn't have enough or has too much DNA, there could be major problems that the cell doesn't want to have happen. So making sure the cell has the chromosomes aligned in the middle during metaphase is incredibly important. I like to talk about one type of cell checkpoint protein during this section. P53 is going to be a protein. This is called protein 53. This protein is going to stop the cell if the DNA is damaged. First, the P53 protein is going to try to initiate the DNA to repair itself. The P53 protein can also inhibit the cell from going further into the cell cycle. P53 can also stop the cell from moving forward in the cell cycle by producing something called a CDK inhibitor. This will obviously inhibit the CDK that is initiating the next step in the cell cycle. However, if large amounts of mutations or DNA damage occurs, P53 will initiate something called apoptosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death, where the cell is going to die in order to prevent itself from becoming cancerous. The evolutionary advantage here is even though the cell is dying and we as an organism don't want a cell to die, it's going to prevent that cell from becoming cancerous and being a more harmful cell later on in the organism's life. So in order to stop the cell from becoming cancerous, it goes through apoptosis. I think this is a great meme for that P53. Yeah, cells with damaged DNA are going to want to go through cell division, but P53 stops it.